The morning sun glinted off the pristine deck of the 60-foot yacht as I stepped aboard, carrying my equipment cases. A young man in designer clothes turned around, his eyes scanning my casual work attire with obvious disdain. Finally, I was beginning to think, "You cleaning people don't understand punctuality," he sneered, pointing at the deck chairs. "Start with those, then work your way down to the galley, and don't touch anything expensive." I smiled quietly, setting down what he assumed were cleaning supplies, watching him strut away in his $1,000 shoes. I spent the next hour quietly observing while pretending to organize my equipment. The arrogant young man, I soon learned from overhearing conversations, was Bradley Worthington, the third heir to the Worthington maritime shipping fortune. At 25, he had inherited control of the family empire after his father's unexpected death from a stroke 2 years earlier. The yacht buzzed with activity as caterers prepared for what Bradley kept calling his power lunch. I watched him bark orders at everyone around him, treating the staff like they were invisible obstacles to his convenience. When a nervous waiter accidentally bumped his shoulder while carrying a tray of champagne glasses, Bradley exploded. "Watch where you're going, you clumsy idiot. Do you have any idea what this shirt costs?" Bradley grabbed the young man's arm roughly. "More than you make in 3 months, I guarantee it." The waiter, probably no older than 22, stammered apologies while Bradley continued his tirade. I felt my jaw clench as I watched the scene unfold, but I forced myself to stay focused on my work. The equipment cases I was unpacking contained sophisticated marine electronics, not cleaning supplies, but Bradley was too self-absorbed to notice the difference. As guests began arriving, I recognized several faces from news coverage and society pages. Senator Patricia Caldwell, a sharp-featured woman in her 50s, stepped aboard wearing a navy blazer that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. She was followed by James Hartford, a real estate mogul whose developments had displaced countless low-income families across the state. Then came the socialite twins, Madison and Morgan Blackwell, identical blondes who spoke in synchronized patterns that made them sound like they shared a single brain cell. They draped themselves over the yacht's expensive furniture, taking selfies and complaining about everything from the wind direction to the color of the life preservers. "Bradley, darling," Madison cooed, "you simply must do something about this lighting. It's absolutely terrible for photos. The sun isn't cooperating with your vanity project." Bradley laughed, but he immediately summoned a crew member to adjust the awning placement. The man scrambled to comply, sweat beading on his forehead as he worked to satisfy the impossible demands. I continued my setup, installing what appeared to be routine maintenance equipment throughout the yacht's various systems. The guests paid no attention to me, confirming my invisibility as hired help. This gave me perfect access to overhear their conversations, and what I learned made my blood boil. Bradley was bragging to Hartford about his latest business strategy. "The trick is making sure the contracts are just complex enough that these small-time operators can't meet every single requirement," he said, swirling his whiskey. "Then when they inevitably miss something, you default them and keep their deposits. I've made more money from forfeitures than actual shipping this quarter." Senator Caldwell nodded approvingly. "Smart business. My constituents need to understand that success requires adaptation to market realities." "Exactly," Bradley continued. "Take this fishing operation I dealt with last year. Martinez something or other. They thought they could negotiate payment terms like they were equals. I strung them along for 6 months, then pulled the contract over a missed deadline they never even knew about. Boom. $50,000 in penalties, plus I kept their equipment deposits." He laughed while describing how the family had begged for reconsideration, how the father had called repeatedly trying to explain their situation. "The man actually cried on the phone," Bradley said, mimicking a sobbing voice. "Please, Mr. Worthington, this will ruin us. Pathetic." My hands trembled slightly as I connected another monitoring device to the yacht's electrical system. The Martinez family. My family. My father, Roberto Martinez, who had worked 18-hour days trying to build something lasting for his children. My father, whose heart gave out from the stress of losing everything he had built over 20 years of honest labor. I forced myself to breathe steadily and continue working. The guests had no idea they were being recorded, their conversations captured by the sophisticated surveillance equipment hidden within my cleaning supplies. Every word, every admission, every casual description of destroyed lives was being preserved for future use. The party atmosphere grew more toxic as the afternoon progressed. Bradley treated every staff member like a personal servant, snapping his fingers to summon waiters and barking orders at the yacht crew. When the catering supervisor, a middle-aged Latina woman named Maria Santos, politely suggested they needed more time to prepare the main course, Bradley's response was swift and cruel. "Did I ask for your opinion? Just do your job and keep your mouth shut," he snapped. "I don't pay you people to think." Maria's face flushed with embarrassment, but she maintained her professional composure. Later, when Bradley was distracted by his guests, she approached me quietly. "Be careful around him," she whispered. "I've worked events for rich families for 15 years, and I've never seen someone so mean-spirited. Last month he made a waitress cry because her shoes squeaked on his marble floor. Then he docked her pay for disrupting his dinner party." I thanked her for the warning, though I suspected Maria had no idea just how prepared I was for Bradley's cruelty. Around us, the party continued with increasing decadence. Hartford was discussing plans to demolish a historic neighborhood to build luxury condos, while the Blackwell twins debated whether their next charity fundraiser should focus on endangered butterflies or their own social media exposure. Captain Reynolds, the yacht's skipper, approached my work area to check on the electrical connections I was making. A weathered man in his 60s, he had the careful demeanor of someone who had learned to navigate wealthy clients' egos alongside ocean currents. "Everything looking good with those systems?" he asked quietly. "Perfect," I assured him. "These new monitoring systems will keep everything running smoothly." He nodded, but I caught him studying my equipment more closely than the others had. "You know, in 30 years of maritime work, I've never seen cleaning staff with such sophisticated gear." I met his eyes steadily. "Sometimes the best cleaning happens where you can't see it." Captain Reynolds considered this for a moment, then gave me a slight nod of understanding before walking away. He was smarter than Bradley gave him credit for, and I suspected he had witnessed years of the young heir's escalating behavior. As the sun reached its peak, Bradley's treatment of everyone around him grew progressively worse. He was showing off for his guests, demonstrating his power over the people who worked for him. When a young deckhand accidentally left water spots on a railing after cleaning it, Bradley forced him to redo the entire section 3 times before declaring it acceptable. "This is what happens when you hire people who've never seen quality," Bradley announced to his guests. "They simply don't understand the standards required in civilized society." The guests laughed and agreed, completely oblivious to the fact that their host was revealing his own complete lack of civilization. I continued my work installing the final components of my system while mentally cataloging every moment of witnessed cruelty. The afternoon was far from over, and I knew Bradley's behavior would only escalate from here. The party reached its crescendo as more guests arrived via helicopter landing on the yacht's dedicated pad with theatrical flair. Among the new arrivals was Senator Caldwell's family, including her 7-year-old grandson Timothy, a sweet child with curly brown hair who seemed overwhelmed by the adult conversations and ocean movement. Bradley immediately commandeered the boy's attention, insisting Timothy call him sir and treating the child like a prop for his entertainment. "This is how real success looks, kid," Bradley said, gesturing grandly at the yacht's opulent interior. "Your grandmother understands the importance of associating with winners." Timothy nodded politely, but looked uncomfortable with the forced interaction. The child's unease became more apparent as the yacht began moving through larger swells, and I noticed him growing pale as he tried to follow the adults around the deck. The inevitable happened during Bradley's grand tour of the yacht's interior. As he led the group through the main salon, pointing out imported marble surfaces and crystal fixtures, Timothy suddenly became violently seasick. The poor child barely had time to lean forward before vomiting across the white leather furniture and Persian rug. The reaction was immediate and harsh. Bradley's face turned scarlet with rage as he stared at the mess his expensive composure completely shattered. "Are you kidding me?" he screamed, making Timothy flinch and start crying. "This furniture costs more than most people's cars, Senator Control Your Brat." Senator Caldwell rushed to comfort her grandson, but Bradley was just getting started. He pointed directly at me with barely controlled fury. "You cleaning lady, get over here right now and fix this disaster," he commanded. "And hurry up about it. We can't have this stench ruining everyone's afternoon." I approached with my supplies, but my focus went immediately to Timothy, who was still crying and looked terrified by Bradley's explosive reaction. The child was shaking, clearly embarrassed and scared by the adult anger surrounding him. "It's okay, sweetheart," I said gently to Timothy, offering him a clean cloth for his face. "Everyone gets seasick sometimes. It doesn't mean you did anything wrong. My kindness toward the child seemed to enrage Bradley even further. He grabbed my shoulder roughly and spun me around to face him. "Did I tell you to coddle him? I told you to clean up this mess, not play nursemaid?" His voice carried across the entire yacht, ensuring every guest and staff member could hear his tirade. "Know your place and stay in your lane." The humiliation wasn't finished. Bradley demanded I apologize to Timothy for making the situation worse, by showing compassion, forcing me to stand before the frightened child, while every adult on the yacht watched in uncomfortable silence. "I apologize for overstepping my boundaries." I said the words tasting like poison. Timothy looked confused by the forced apology, his young mind unable to understand why kindness required an apology. While I cleaned the mess with deliberate efficiency, I overheard conversations that revealed the deeper scope of Bradley's destructive behavior. James Hartford was sharing stories about Bradley's business practices with obvious admiration. "The fishing industry cleanup was brilliant," Hartford said. "Bradley identified 12 family operations along the coast and systematically defaulted their contracts. Most of them had been operating for generations, completely set in their old-fashioned ways." "What happened to the families?" asked one of the newer guests, a banking executive named Robert Chase. Bradley answered with obvious pride. "They learned about market efficiency. Some of them relocated to find work elsewhere. Others adapted to new circumstances. One of the older operators had some kind of health emergency during the transition period, but that's the reality of competitive business." My hands clenched around the cleaning cloth as I listened to Bradley casually dismiss my father's death as a health emergency during transition. Roberto Martinez hadn't just had a health emergency. He had suffered a massive heart attack at age 52, brought on by months of devastating stress as Bradley systematically destroyed everything my father had built through decades of honest work. The yacht staff moved around us like ghosts, their faces carefully neutral as they witnessed Bradley's escalating behavior. During a brief moment when the guests were distracted by helicopter arrivals, Maria Santos approached me again. "I heard what he said about the fishing families," she whispered. "My cousin worked for one of them, the Martinez operation. Good people who lost everything because that monster enjoyed watching them suffer." I paused in my work, meeting her eyes briefly. "What happened to the family?" "The father died from the stress. Heart attack. The mother had to sell their house and move in with relatives. I heard the daughter went away to college before it happened, but she never came back after her father's funeral." Maria shook her head sadly. "Destroying people's lives for sport. It's evil." As the afternoon progressed, I gained access to more areas of the yacht, under the guise of complete cleaning coverage. Each area contained monitoring equipment that I installed, while the guests remained focused on their increasingly drunk conversations. The surveillance system was now comprehensive, covering every space where incriminating discussions might occur. The breakthrough moment came when I accessed Bradley's private office suite. While cleaning his desk, I discovered his personal computer was logged into encrypted communication channels with other business associates. The screen displayed ongoing conversations about coordinating contract defaults across multiple industries, creating artificial scarcity to drive up prices and sharing strategies for avoiding labor law compliance. One message thread particularly caught my attention. Bradley was discussing plans to expand his operation by targeting Latino-owned businesses, specifically describing them as easy marks because they're too trusting and not litigious enough to fight back effectively. Another conversation revealed his systematic recording and sharing of staff humiliations for entertainment. Bradley had been secretly filming workers during their most vulnerable moments, then sharing the footage with his wealthy friends as a form of twisted amusement. The cruelty wasn't just business strategy, it was a recreational activity. I photographed every document and conversation thread, ensuring the evidence would be properly preserved. The pattern of deliberate destruction was clear and well documented, extending far beyond my family's experience to dozens of other victims across multiple states. As I worked, Timothy approached me again, still looking upset from the earlier incident. His grandmother was engaged in political conversations and hadn't noticed him wandering away from the adult gathering. "Are you really in trouble because you were nice to me?" he asked quietly. Before I could answer, Bradley spotted us talking and stormed over with renewed anger. "What did I tell you about staying in your lane?" he demanded. "Timothy, get away from the help. She's here to work, not to socialize with our guests." The child looked confused and hurt by the sharp words, but he obediently moved away. Bradley wasn't finished with his demonstration of power, however. He followed Timothy and loudly proclaimed to all the nearby adults, "This is exactly what I was talking about earlier. Give these people an inch, and they think they can take a mile. Clear boundaries are essential." The guests murmured agreement, though several looked distinctly uncomfortable with Bradley's treatment of both me and the child. Senator Caldwell seemed particularly displeased with how her grandson was being used as a prop for Bradley's power displays, but political considerations kept her from speaking up directly. The humiliation continued as Bradley demanded I perform increasingly degrading tasks while the guests watched. He insisted I re-clean areas that were already spotless, forced me to organize and reorganize supply closets according to his arbitrary standards, and made me polish fixtures that didn't need polishing. "Attention to detail," he announced to his audience. "This is how you maintain standards and ensure people understand their role in the hierarchy." Each degrading task was performed with theatrical emphasis, designed to entertain his guests and reinforce his position as someone with absolute power over the working class. I completed every task with professional efficiency, while my hidden recording equipment captured every word and action. The breaking point was approaching, and I knew from experience that Bradley's behavior would escalate until he reached a crescendo of cruelty that would expose his true character to everyone present. The afternoon sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, and the golden light streaming across the yacht's deck would soon become the stage for Bradley's ultimate downfall. The atmosphere on the yacht shifted dramatically when Dorothy Wilson Bradley's elderly housekeeper arrived via water taxi to assist with the dinner preparation. Dorothy was a dignified woman in her mid-60s, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and the careful posture of someone who had spent decades in domestic service. I had heard Maria mention Dorothy earlier, describing her as a woman who had worked for the Worthington family for 30 years, starting when Bradley's father was still building the business. She moved through the yacht with practiced efficiency, carrying fresh linens and coordinating with the catering staff to ensure the evening meal would meet Bradley's exacting standards. Dorothy's presence immediately changed the dynamic among the staff. The younger workers clearly looked up to her, seeking her guidance on proper procedures and taking comfort in her calm authority. She treated everyone with respect, from the nervous waiters to the experienced yacht crew, creating a pocket of dignity in an environment dominated by Bradley's cruelty. The fatal mistake happened during the dinner setup. Dorothy was arranging fresh flowers in the main dining area when she accidentally knocked over an empty crystal glass with her elbow. The glass fell onto the carpeted floor, making a soft thud, but remaining completely intact. No damage occurred, no mess was created, but Bradley witnessed the incident from across the room. His reaction was explosive and immediate. "Dorothy, what the hell is wrong with you?" Bradley shouted, crossing the room in 3 quick strides. "That crystal is irreplaceable. Do you have any idea how much those glasses cost?" Dorothy's face went pale as she bent to retrieve the undamaged glass. "I'm terribly sorry, Mr. Bradley. It slipped from my hand, but it's perfectly fine. No harm done." "No harm done?" Bradley's voice rose to a near scream. "You think because it didn't break this time, there's no harm done? What about next time? What about when your shaking hands finally destroy something I can't replace?" The cruelty in his words hit Dorothy like physical blows. Her hands began trembling visibly as Bradley continued his assault, his voice carrying across the yacht for all to hear. 30 years, he sneered. 30 years of employment, and this is what I get in return. Clumsy, careless work from someone too old to handle basic responsibilities. Dorothy's breathing became rapid and shallow as the verbal attack continued. I recognized the signs of an approaching panic attack and immediately moved toward her, but Bradley intercepted me with furious intensity. "Stay right where you are, cleaning lady. This doesn't concern you." But Dorothy's condition was deteriorating rapidly. Her face had turned ashen, and she was gasping for breath as tears streamed down her cheeks. The stress and humiliation were triggering a full medical emergency, and I couldn't stand by and watch. I ignored Bradley's order and rushed to Dorothy's side, gently guiding her to a nearby chair and helping her focus on controlled breathing. "It's okay, Dorothy. Just breathe slowly, in through your nose, out through your mouth. You're safe." My first aid training kicked in as I helped her work through the panic attack, speaking in calm, reassuring tones while monitoring her pulse and breathing. The elderly woman's condition began stabilizing as she focused on my voice and breathing instructions. This act of human compassion sent Bradley into an absolute rage. "Did you just ignore a direct order?" he demanded, grabbing my arm and trying to pull me away from Dorothy. "I told you this wasn't your business." "She's having a medical emergency," I replied firmly, not moving from Dorothy's side. "She needs help. She needs to learn to control herself and do her job properly," Bradley shot back. "And you need to learn that helping the help isn't part of your job description." The guests watched in stunned silence as Bradley's mask of civilized behavior completely disintegrated. Even his usual supporters looked uncomfortable with the level of cruelty they were witnessing. Senator Caldwell made a tentative attempt at intervention. "Bradley, perhaps we should give the woman a moment to recover." "Senator, with respect, this is my yacht and my employee," Bradley snapped back. "I'll handle my staff discipline as I see fit." But the worst was yet to come. As Dorothy's breathing returned to normal and the color came back to her face, Bradley made his ultimate demonstration of power. "Dorothy, you're fired," he announced loudly. "Effective immediately. 30 years of employment ends right here, right now. Security will escort you off the yacht, and you can collect your personal belongings from the estate later this week." Dorothy's face crumpled as the words hit her. "Please, Mr. Bradley, I have nowhere else to go. My husband is disabled and we depend on my income for his medical care. I've given your family 3 decades of loyal service." Bradley laughed at her tears with genuine enjoyment. "Loyal service. You call dropping my crystal loyal service. You call disrupting my party with your dramatics loyal service." He turned to address his guests like he was performing for their entertainment. "This is exactly what I was saying earlier about maintaining standards. Sometimes you have to cut dead weight regardless of sentiment." Dorothy's quiet sobbing filled the air as the full impact of her situation became clear. At 64, with no other job prospects and a disabled husband depending on her income, Bradley had just destroyed her entire life over an undamaged glass and a panic attack he had triggered through his cruelty. That's when I stood up and faced Bradley directly. "You can't fire her for having a medical emergency that you caused," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the yacht. Bradley's eyes blazed with fury at being challenged by someone he considered beneath contempt. "Excuse me, did the cleaning lady just tell me what I can and cannot do on my own yacht?" "I'm telling you that what you're doing is wrong," I replied steadily. "Dorothy has done nothing to deserve this treatment." "Nothing." Bradley stepped closer, his voice dripping with venom. "She's too old, too clumsy, and too emotional for the standards I require, and you, cleaning lady, are way out of line interfering in matters that don't concern you." The confrontation escalated quickly from there. Bradley began berating both Dorothy and me simultaneously, working himself into a frenzy of righteous anger at being questioned by the help. His guests watched in fascination and horror as their host revealed the true depth of his character. "Get off my yacht," Bradley finally commanded, pointing toward the dock. "Both of you. Dorothy, you're fired, and you—" He pointed at me. "You're terminated for insubordination. Pack up your little cleaning supplies and get off my boat immediately." I began collecting my equipment cases, moving with deliberate calm, while Bradley's rage continued to build. Dorothy remained seated still, crying softly and looking completely lost. "Move faster," Bradley demanded. "I want both of you off this yacht right now." As I carried my cases toward the gangway, Bradley physically grabbed my equipment and hurled it toward the dock, scattering some of the contents. His guests watched in shocked silence as their host's behavior descended into what could only be described as a temper tantrum. "Get off the boat, cleaning ladies only!" Bradley screamed at the top of his lungs, his face purple with rage. I stepped onto the dock with my equipment turning to face the yacht, as Bradley began untying the mooring lines himself. His anger had given way to triumphant laughter as he prepared to strand both Dorothy and me without transportation back to shore. "This is what happens when you forget your place," he called out gleefully, casting off the final line. "Enjoy the long swim back to reality." The yacht's engines roared to life as Bradley took personal control of the helm, backing away from the dock while waving mockingly at us. His guests lined the rail, some filming the spectacle with their phones, while others looked deeply uncomfortable with what they were witnessing. "Bye!" Bradley shouted across the widening gap of water, his laughter echoing across the harbor. That's when I reached into my pocket and pulled out what he assumed was a car key fob. The small electronic device looked innocent enough, but it controlled far more than any automobile. I pressed the single red button. The yacht's engines immediately died with a grinding mechanical sound that carried clearly across the water. All lights went out simultaneously, followed by the air conditioning navigation systems and every other electronic component on the vessel. Bradley's laughter cut off abruptly as his yacht went completely dead in the water, drifting helplessly with the current, while he frantically tried to restart systems that would no longer respond to any command. "Actually," I called out across the water, my voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence, "I'm the owner, and I just remotely locked the helm. Swim back." The shocked silence from the yacht was absolute as Bradley and his guests began to comprehend the magnitude of what had just occurred. The transformation on Bradley's face was something to witness. His triumphant grin melted into confusion, then growing alarm as he frantically pressed buttons and turned switches that produced no response whatsoever. The yacht's sophisticated control systems remained completely dead, leaving 60 feet of luxury vessel drifting powerlessly in the harbor current. "What did you do?" Bradley screamed across the water, his voice cracking with panic. "What did you do to my yacht?" I remained standing calmly on the dock, holding the remote device that had just reduced his symbol of power to an expensive piece of floating decoration. Dorothy stood beside me, her tears replaced by growing amazement as she began to understand that something extraordinary was happening. "Your yacht!" I called back, projecting my voice clearly across the water. "That's interesting because according to the Marina records, this vessel is owned by Martinez Marine Holdings. Has been for the past 6 months. The guests on board began murmuring among themselves as Bradley's face went white with shock. Senator Caldwell stepped forward to the rail, her political instincts recognizing a developing crisis. "Bradley, what is she talking about?" the senator demanded. "She's lying," Bradley shouted back, but his voice lacked conviction. "She's just some cleaning lady. She's trying to scam us." I reached into my equipment case and pulled out a leather portfolio, opening it to display official documentation. "My name is Haley Martinez," I announced, my voice carrying clearly across the water. "I'm a marine systems engineer with MIT credentials and the owner of Martinez Marine Holdings. For the past 6 months, Bradley Worthington has been paying rent to use this yacht for his business meetings and social events." The silence that followed was profound. Even the harbor sounds seemed muted as the implications began settling over everyone present. "You've been unknowingly paying rent to the daughter of Roberto Martinez," I continued, "the fisherman whose business you destroyed through deliberate contract fraud. The same Roberto Martinez who died of a heart attack caused by the stress of losing everything he built over 20 years of honest work." Bradley's knees visibly buckled as the full scope of his situation became clear. The guests on the yacht began backing away from him as they realized they had been witnessing something far more complex than simple employer-employee discipline. "That's impossible," Bradley whispered, but his voice lacked any conviction. "Martinez Marine Holdings. I researched the company. It's legitimate." "It's completely legitimate," I agreed. "A marine engineering and yacht management company that I established using the life insurance money from my father's death. The same death you caused through your systematic destruction of his livelihood." I opened another section of my portfolio displaying financial documents and business registrations. "Every monthly payment you've made for yacht rental has gone directly into a fund designated for victim restitution. You've been financing your own downfall, Bradley." The technical explanation came next, delivered with the professional precision of someone who had spent 3 years planning this moment. "The cleaning equipment I've been installing throughout the yacht contains a comprehensive remote monitoring and control system. Every conversation you've had today has been recorded. Every admission of contract fraud, every description of deliberate business destruction, every moment of witnessed cruelty toward your staff." Dorothy gasped beside me as she realized the scope of what had been unfolding. "You mean everything he said about the fishing families?" "All recorded," I confirmed. Along with his descriptions of targeting Latino-owned businesses, his admission of systematic contract fraud, and his detailed accounts of destroying families for entertainment. On the yacht, the guests were pulling out their phones, some trying to call for help, while others frantically deleted photos and videos they had taken during the party. The realization that they had been recorded during their own incriminating conversations was beginning to dawn on them. James Hartford leaned over the rail, his real estate mogul confidence shaken. "This has to be illegal. You can't just disable someone's yacht." "Actually," I called back, "as the legal owner of the vessel, I can disable my own property whenever I choose. What's illegal is the systematic fraud, tax evasion, and worker exploitation that Bradley has been describing in detail, while my recording equipment captured every word." Senator Caldwell's political instincts were sharper than the others. She understood immediately that the situation had evolved far beyond a simple dispute between employer and employee. "Bradley," she said quietly, "I think we need to contact legal counsel immediately." But Bradley wasn't listening. He was staring across the water at me with a mixture of terror and rage, finally understanding that his victim's daughter had spent years setting up this elaborate trap. "The Martinez operation," he said slowly. "You're Roberto's daughter, the one who went away to college." "MIT," I confirmed. "Marine engineering degree followed by advanced studies in business management and electronic systems integration. I spent 3 years learning everything I needed to know about yacht operations, maritime law, and electronic surveillance systems." The personal element of the revenge began to sink in for Bradley and his guests. This wasn't random justice or coincidental exposure. This was a carefully planned operation by someone with both the technical skills and emotional motivation to destroy him completely. "While you were bragging about my father's death as a health emergency during transition," I continued, "I was building the technical capabilities to give you a real transition of your own, from privileged yacht owner to federal defendant." Dorothy gripped my arm with amazement. "Your father was Roberto Martinez, I remember when Mr. Bradley was bragging about that business deal. He showed people pictures of your father begging on the phone." "He what?" The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Bradley hadn't just destroyed my father financially, he had humiliated him for entertainment and preserved the humiliation for repeated viewing. "He recorded the phone calls," Dorothy said softly. "Your father crying and pleading for more time. Mr. Bradley showed those recordings to his friends at parties. He thought it was hilarious." The rage that coursed through me at that moment was unlike anything I had ever experienced, but it was quickly replaced by cold satisfaction as I realized that Bradley's cruelty had just provided the final piece of evidence needed to destroy him completely. "Well then," I said, pulling out my phone, "it's time for Bradley to experience what it's like to be on the other side of a recorded humiliation." I speed-dialed a number I had memorized months ago, and the call was answered on the first ring. "Coast Guard Station Harbor Bay, this is Petty Officer Williams. This is Haley Martinez reporting a disabled vessel with multiple passengers requiring assistance and possible federal law enforcement intervention," I said clearly. "The vessel is dead in the water due to mechanical failure, and I have evidence of federal crimes that need immediate investigation." Bradley heard every word and his face went completely ashen as he realized that Coast Guard intervention meant federal jurisdiction and the involvement of agencies with real investigative power. "Please stand by for GPS coordinates and vessel identification." I continued into the phone while looking directly at Bradley. "And you might want to contact the FBI. I have extensive evidence of systematic fraud, tax evasion, and federal contract violations." The call ended and I turned back to face the powerless yacht where Bradley stood frozen with terror. "The Coast Guard estimated arrival time is 12 minutes, I announced. "That should give you just enough time to think about all the people you've destroyed over the years and what it feels like to be completely powerless while waiting for other people to decide your fate." For the first time in his privileged life, Bradley Worthington III was learning what it meant to be at someone else's mercy. The Coast Guard response was swift and professional. 3 vessels approached the disabled yacht with practiced precision, 2 patrol boats and a larger cutter that carried specialized boarding equipment. The red and blue emergency lights reflected off the water as federal authorities took control of the situation with calm efficiency. Leading the boarding party was Agent Sarah Thompson of the FBI's Maritime Crime Unit, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who had been investigating Worthington Maritime for the better part of 2 years. As she stepped onto the yacht's deck, her presence immediately commanded the attention of Bradley and his guests. "Mr. Worthington," Agent Thompson said, producing her credentials in a folded document, "I have a federal warrant for your arrest on charges of systematic fraud, tax evasion, criminal conspiracy, and violation of federal maritime commerce regulations." Bradley's legs gave out completely, and he slumped against the yacht's railing as the reality of his situation crashed over him. "This isn't possible," he stammered. "You can't arrest me. I'm Bradley Worthington. My family has government contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars." "Had?" Agent Thompson corrected. "As of this morning, all Worthington Maritime contracts with federal agencies have been suspended pending criminal investigation. Your corporate accounts have been frozen for asset recovery purposes." The timing wasn't coincidental. While I had been setting up my confrontation on the yacht, federal agents had been executing simultaneous raids on Worthington maritime offices, warehouses, and financial institutions. The operation I had witnessed was the culmination of a much larger investigation that had been building for months. Agent Thompson turned to address the assembled guests. "I'm going to need everyone to remain calm while we process this scene. You're not under arrest at this time, but your cooperation with our investigation would be appreciated." Senator Caldwell stepped forward, her political experience helping her navigate the crisis with measured words. "Agent Thompson, I want to make it clear that I had no knowledge of any illegal activities. I was simply attending what I believe to be a social gathering." "We understand, Senator," Agent Thompson replied diplomatically. "However, we will need statements from everyone who is present today, particularly regarding conversations about business practices and financial arrangements." The revelation that transformed everyone's understanding came when Agent Thompson addressed me directly. "Ms. Martinez, thank you for your cooperation with our investigation over the past 8 months. The evidence you've provided has been instrumental in building our case." 8 months. I had been working undercover with federal law enforcement since the previous fall, shortly after I had approached them with initial evidence of Bradley's crimes. The yacht ownership, the elaborate setup, the systematic recording of evidence, all of it had been coordinated with FBI guidance to ensure legal admissibility and maximum impact. The surveillance equipment installed throughout the vessel has captured admissions to federal crimes involving interstate commerce, tax evasion, and systematic defrauding of federal contract programs, Agent Thompson announced to the assembled group. "All conversations from today's gathering are evidence in ongoing federal prosecution." Bradley's complete meltdown was spectacular to witness. "This is entrapment!" he screamed. "You can't use set-up evidence. I was tricked into this." "Actually," Agent Thompson replied calmly, "encouraging someone to commit crimes would be entrapment. Recording someone voluntarily describing crimes they've already committed is called evidence gathering." The scope of the federal case began emerging as Agent Thompson detailed the charges. Worthington Maritime had been systematically defaulting government contracts after performing substandard work, keeping advance payments while leaving taxpayers to cover the cost of project failures. The pattern extended to military supply contracts, infrastructure projects, and environmental cleanup operations. "Your admission today about deliberately targeting minority-owned businesses for contract fraud constitutes a federal civil rights violation," Agent Thompson informed Bradley. "The Department of Justice takes such cases very seriously." But the personal element of justice was equally important to me. As federal agents processed the scene, I was finally able to explain to Dorothy what had really been happening. "Dorothy, you're not fired," I told her gently. "Bradley has no authority to fire you from anything because he doesn't own this yacht, and as of this morning, he doesn't control Worthington Maritime either." The elderly woman's eyes filled with tears of relief and amazement. "But I don't understand. How is this possible?" "Because sometimes people who look powerless are actually the ones with the most power," I explained. "You've witnessed years of Bradley's cruelty, and your testimony will help ensure he faces consequences for all of it." Agent Thompson approached us with additional information that made the moment even more satisfying. "Ms. Martinez, I wanted you to know that we've identified 43 families who were victims of similar contract fraud schemes. The evidence collected today will support restitution claims for all of them." 43 families. The scope of Bradley's systematic destruction was even wider than I had imagined. Each represented lives, disrupted dreams destroyed, and financial devastation caused by one man's greed and cruelty. The media presence arrived as helicopters from news stations circled overhead, drawn by reports of federal law enforcement activity at the exclusive marina. The story was already breaking on social media as guests from the party shared their experiences with friends and followers. "Federal heir arrested in maritime fraud scheme" was trending on social platforms within 30 minutes, accompanied by shaky phone videos of Bradley being read his rights, while yacht guests looked on in shock. Senator Caldwell's damage control efforts were swift, but ultimately futile. Her staff released statements distancing her from Bradley's business practices, but the recorded conversations from the yacht clearly showed her discussing and approving his methods. Her political future would be significantly impacted by association with federal criminal activity. James Hartford faced his own complications as FBI agents informed him that his real estate practices would be subject to investigation for potential coordination with Bradley's fraud schemes. The comfortable relationships between wealthy criminals were being systematically exposed and disrupted. Even the Blackwell twins faced consequences as their social media posts from the party inadvertently provided evidence of their knowledge of illegal activities. Their carefully curated public images as innocent socialites were permanently damaged by their enthusiastic participation in Bradley's humiliation of workers. The transformation of Dorothy Wilson was remarkable to witness. The frightened, crying woman who had been fired for dropping an undamaged glass was replaced by someone standing tall with dignity restored. As news crews interviewed witnesses, Dorothy spoke eloquently about the systematic abuse she had endured and witnessed over the years. "He treated working people like we weren't human," Dorothy told one reporter. "Today, I learned that good people sometimes spend years planning to make things right, even when it seems impossible." Agent Thompson provided additional details about the broader investigation during her impromptu press conference on the dock. This case represents the largest maritime fraud prosecution in this district's history. The systematic nature of the criminal enterprise, combined with the civil rights violations, makes this a priority case for federal prosecutors. As Bradley was transported to federal detention in handcuffs, he made one final attempt to assert his imagined privilege. "This won't stick," he shouted to the cameras. "My lawyers will have me out by tomorrow. You can't destroy the Worthington family over some paperwork discrepancies." But Agent Thompson had one more revelation that silenced his protests completely. "Mr. Worthington, you should know that your mother, Catherine Worthington, has been cooperating with our investigation for the past 4 months. She provided extensive financial records and business correspondence that corroborated Miss Martinez's evidence." The look of absolute betrayal and shock on Bradley's face was the final satisfaction I needed. Even his own mother had recognized his criminality and chosen justice over family loyalty. As the federal vehicles departed with their prisoner, I stood on the dock, watching the sunset reflect off the water where my father had once operated his fishing boat with pride and dignity. The yacht that had been a symbol of everything Bradley had stolen from my family was now evidence in his federal prosecution. Dorothy approached me as the crowd began dispersing, her eyes still bright with amazement at the day's events. "Your father would be so proud," she said softly. "You didn't just get justice for your family, you got justice for all of us." The truth of her words settled over me as I realized that revenge had transformed into something larger and more meaningful than I had originally planned. This hadn't just been about punishing Bradley Worthington. It had been about proving that systematic cruelty and abuse of power have consequences even for people who believe themselves untouchable. The sound of helicopter rotors cutting through the evening air announced an arrival that nobody had expected. A sleek corporate aircraft descended toward the yacht's landing pad, its precision approach indicating an experienced pilot and an urgent passenger. Catherine Worthington stepped onto the deck with the commanding presence that had built a maritime empire from nothing. At 62, she carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who had earned every ounce of her success through intelligence, determination, and an unwavering moral compass that her son had never inherited. The assembled crowd, including remaining guests and federal agents, watched in fascination as Bradley's mother surveyed the scene with calculating eyes. Agent Thompson approached her with professional courtesy, recognizing a key figure in the ongoing investigation. "Mrs. Worthington, thank you for coming. Your cooperation with our investigation has been invaluable." Catherine nodded curtly before addressing the group at large. "I want everyone here to understand something clearly. What my son did today, and what he's been doing for years, does not represent the values or practices of the Worthington family business." She walked directly to where Dorothy stood still, somewhat overwhelmed by the evening's events. Without hesitation, Catherine took Dorothy's hands in hers and looked directly into her eyes. "Dorothy, I owe you an apology that's 30 years overdue. I should have been paying closer attention to how my son treated the people who work for our family. Your loyalty and service deserve respect, not the cruelty Bradley showed you." The moment was profoundly moving as Catherine continued. "Effective immediately, you're reinstated with full back pay for any wages Bradley withheld. More importantly, I'd like to offer you a position as my personal assistant with a salary that reflects your true value to our organization." Dorothy's tears returned, but these were tears of vindication and hope, rather than humiliation and despair. "Mrs. Worthington, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll help me rebuild what my son destroyed," Catherine replied. "Your knowledge of his practices will be essential as we work to make amends to his victims." Catherine then turned to face me, and I saw recognition in her eyes that went beyond the evening's revelations. "Miss Martinez, I've been researching your background since our investigators first made contact. Your father was an exceptional man who built his business with integrity and treated his workers with respect." The personal conversation that followed revealed the depth of Catherine's investigation into her son's crimes. "I hired private investigators 6 months ago after receiving multiple complaints about Bradley's business practices. What they discovered sickened me." She reached into her briefcase and produced a thick folder of documents. Contract fraud, systematic theft, deliberate destruction of family businesses, worker exploitation. The evidence was overwhelming, but I needed legal guidance on how to proceed against my own son. Agent Thompson confirmed Catherine's cooperation. "Mrs. Worthington contacted our office 4 months ago with extensive financial records and business correspondence. Her assistance has been crucial in building our case." The scope of Catherine's planned intervention was remarkable. "I've established a victim compensation fund with $50 million in initial funding," she announced. "Every family that Bradley destroyed through fraud will receive full restitution plus additional compensation for their suffering." But the most dramatic moment came with her next announcement. "Furthermore, Bradley Worthington III is hereby completely disinherited. No trust fund, no company control, no access to family assets. When he gets out of prison, he'll start over with nothing, just like the families he destroyed." The guests who remained on the yacht listened in stunned silence as Catherine systematically dismantled every aspect of Bradley's privileged existence. This wasn't just criminal prosecution. It was total social and financial exile from everything he had taken for granted. "Worthington Maritime will be restructured as an employee-owned cooperative," Catherine continued. "The workers who actually do the work will own shares in the company and participate in decision-making. No more exploitation, no more systematic abuse." She turned to address me directly. "Miss Martinez, I'd like to offer you a position as Chief Engineering Officer for the restructured company. Your technical skills and moral integrity are exactly what we need to rebuild our reputation." The offer was tempting, but I had other plans. "Mrs. Worthington, I appreciate the offer, but I've decided to expand Martinez Marine Holdings into a full-service advocacy organization. There are too many other Bradley Worthingtons out there who need to face consequences." Catherine smiled with what looked like pride. "Then I hope you'll accept our financial support for that mission. The compensation fund will include funding for your advocacy organization." As if summoned by the mention of justice and advocacy, Timothy Caldwell approached our group with a folded piece of paper in his small hands. The 7-year-old had been sitting quietly with his grandmother during the adult conversations, but he had been processing everything with the clarity that children often bring to complex situations. "Miss Haley," Timothy said softly, offering me the paper, "I drew you a picture." I unfolded the drawing to find a child's crayon illustration of a boat on blue water with stick figures that were clearly labeled. One figure was marked "Mean Man" and showed Bradley with an angry face. Another was labeled "Nice Lady" and showed me with a smile. At the bottom, in careful 7-year-old handwriting, were the words, "Thank you for being nice to me." The simple drawing captured something profound about the day's events. From Timothy's perspective, the complex web of fraud, revenge, and justice boiled down to a basic truth. Kindness mattered more than power, and good people eventually found ways to stop bad people. Senator Caldwell approached our group with visible discomfort, clearly understanding that her political future had been significantly damaged by her association with Bradley's crimes. "Mrs. Worthington, I want you to know that I had no idea about the scope of your son's activities." Catherine's response was diplomatically brutal. "Senator, the recordings from today show you discussing and approving systematic fraud against minority-owned businesses. Whether you face criminal charges will be up to federal prosecutors, but I suspect your constituents will have their own opinions about your judgment." The senator's damage control efforts would prove futile in the coming weeks, as the full scope of the recorded conversations became public. Her political career was effectively over-ended by her own words captured during Bradley's yacht party. As the evening progressed, other guests departed quietly, each understanding that their association with the day's events would have lasting consequences. The comfortable world of wealthy privilege had been shattered by the revelation that their actions had consequences and their victims had names, faces, and the ability to fight back. Dr. Amanda Foster, the guest who had tried to help Dorothy during her panic attack, approached me before leaving. "I wanted to tell you how much I admired what you did today. Too many of us stay silent when we witness cruelty, thinking it's not our place to intervene. Her words resonated deeply as I realized that Bradley's downfall had inspired others to consider their own responsibilities when witnessing injustice. The ripple effects of the day's events would extend far beyond one criminal's prosecution. As the yacht was prepared for federal impoundment, as evidence, Catherine made one final gesture that completed the circle of justice. She handed me the yacht's ownership documents, legally transferring the vessel to Martinez Marine Holdings. "This should belong to your family," she said simply. "Do whatever you think your father would want done with it." I knew immediately what Roberto Martinez would have wanted. "It's going to become a floating classroom for marine engineering students from working-class families," I announced, "especially students whose parents work in maritime industries." The symbolism was perfect. Bradley's symbol of privilege and power would be transformed into an opportunity for the children of the workers he had exploited to gain the education and skills needed to build better lives. As the sun set completely over Harbor Bay, Marina, I stood on the dock where everything had begun, surrounded by people who had witnessed justice prevail over systematic cruelty. Dorothy Wilson was no longer a frightened abuse victim, but a dignified advocate for worker rights. Catherine Worthington had chosen moral courage over family loyalty. Even Timothy Caldwell had learned that kindness was more powerful than cruelty. The day had started with me pretending to be a cleaning lady to expose one man's crimes. It was ending with the realization that sometimes the most powerful form of cleaning involves removing corruption and cruelty from positions of authority, creating space for dignity and justice to flourish. Bradley Worthington III was learning what it meant to face consequences for his actions. More importantly, his victims were learning that systematic abuse could be stopped when good people refused to accept injustice as inevitable. 6 months later, I stood in the same spot on Harbor Bay Marina, where Bradley Worthington had tried to strand me and Dorothy Wilson. The view looked identical, but everything had fundamentally changed in ways that would have seemed impossible during those moments of humiliation and rage. The federal prosecution of Bradley had concluded with a sentence that satisfied both justice and the victim's need for accountability. 12 years in federal prison, plus full restitution to all identified victims, plus mandatory community service focused on maritime worker safety education upon his release. The judge had been particularly influenced by the recordings of Bradley mocking my father's death and describing the systematic targeting of minority-owned businesses. But the real transformation wasn't in Bradley's punishment. It was in the positive changes that his downfall had made possible. Martinez Justice Foundation had grown from an idea born of personal revenge into a nationally recognized advocacy organization. We had successfully restored 43 family businesses that Bradley had destroyed, providing not just financial compensation, but also technical assistance, legal support, and business mentorship to ensure long-term success. Dorothy Wilson had become the heart and soul of our worker advocacy program. Her dignified presence and decades of experience dealing with workplace abuse made her the perfect person to train other workers about their rights and resources. She traveled to conferences across the country, sharing her story and teaching people that no job requires accepting humiliation or cruelty. "Your father would be amazed by what you've built," Dorothy often told me. She was right. Roberto Martinez had been a man who believed in honest work, fair treatment, and the possibility that good people could make positive change in the world. The foundation bearing his name had become everything he would have wanted his legacy to represent. The yacht itself had been transformed into exactly what I had promised: a floating classroom for marine engineering students from working-class backgrounds. The Martinez Maritime Academy operated year-round, providing hands-on technical education, combined with courses in business ethics, worker rights, and social justice. Students learned not just how to design and maintain marine systems, but how to build careers that served their communities rather than exploiting them. Catherine Worthington had kept every promise she made during that dramatic evening 6 months ago. Worthington Maritime was now a thriving employee-owned cooperative where workers participated in both decision-making and profit-sharing. The company had become a model for ethical business practices in the maritime industry, with other organizations adopting similar structures. More personally, Catherine had become something like a mentor to me, sharing the business wisdom she had gained through decades of building success while maintaining integrity. Our monthly meetings had evolved into genuine friendship, based on mutual respect and shared commitment to justice. The political consequences had been equally satisfying. Senator Patricia Caldwell had resigned from office after recordings of her conversations on the yacht became public. Her replacement was a former maritime worker who had been personally victimized by the corrupt contract practices that Caldwell had supported. Congressional hearings inspired by Bradley's case led to comprehensive maritime worker protection legislation that strengthened safety regulations and provided better legal recourse for exploitation victims. Even the Blackwell twins had faced meaningful consequences. Their social media documentation of the yacht party had destroyed their carefully constructed images as innocent socialites, leading to the collapse of their influence-based business ventures. More importantly, the public exposure of their enthusiastic participation in worker humiliation had inspired other victims to come forward with stories of systematic abuse within wealthy social circles. My personal life had found unexpected happiness through the connections formed during the investigation. Captain David Chen of the Coast Guard, who had led the maritime response to Bradley's disabled yacht, had become a close friend during the months of legal proceedings. Our shared commitment to maritime safety and justice had evolved into something deeper, and we had recently announced our engagement. David understood the importance of my advocacy work and supported the Foundation's mission completely. He often said that meeting someone who had transformed personal trauma into positive social change had inspired him to see law enforcement as more than just reactive response to crimes, but as an opportunity to build safer, more just communities. The ripple effects continued expanding in ways I could never have anticipated. Other victims of systematic business fraud had contacted the Foundation seeking assistance, leading to investigations that exposed similar criminal enterprises across multiple industries. The techniques we had developed for gathering evidence and building federal cases were being shared with advocacy organizations nationwide. Timothy Caldwell, now 8 years old, had remained in contact with me throughout the year. His grandmother's political downfall had actually improved his life by reducing the pressure to maintain artificial social connections. Timothy's genuine kindness and natural sense of justice made him a favorite visitor at the Maritime Academy, where he loved learning about boat engines and asking engineering students about their projects. His latest drawing, proudly displayed in my office, showed the yacht classroom surrounded by smiling stick figures labeled "Students Learning Good Things." At the bottom, in increasingly sophisticated handwriting, he had written, "Thank you for showing me that nice people can win." The moment of deepest personal satisfaction came during my monthly visit to my father's grave. I brought him updates on the Foundation's work stories about the families we had helped, and descriptions of the Maritime Academy students who were building careers based on the values he had taught me. "Papa, 47 families now have their businesses back," I told him during my most recent visit. "The Martinez name means justice and integrity in the maritime industry. The Foundation has helped change federal law to protect workers from the kind of abuse that you suffered. Bradley Worthington learned that destroying good people's lives has consequences." Standing there in this quiet cemetery, I felt a sense of completion that went beyond simple revenge. Roberto Martinez had raised his daughter to believe in hard work, integrity, and standing up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves. The Foundation's success proved that those values could triumph over systematic cruelty and abuse of power. The business aspects of my life had flourished as well. Martinez Marine Holdings had expanded into a full-service engineering firm, specializing in maritime safety systems and worker protection technology. Our client list included government agencies, ethical private companies, and worker advocacy organizations who valued our commitment to combining technical excellence with social responsibility. The contrast with Bradley's current situation provided its own satisfaction. Prison reports indicated he was struggling to adapt to an environment where his family name and inherited wealth provided no protection or privilege. He was required to work in the prison kitchen for standard wages, learning for the first time what it meant to perform honest labor without the option of treating coworkers with cruelty. More meaningfully, Bradley's mandatory participation in victim impact programs was slowly creating some understanding of the human cost of his actions. Dorothy Wilson had agreed to participate in one such session, sharing directly with Bradley how his abuse had affected not just her, but her disabled husband, who had depended on her income. Catherine regularly updated me on these sessions. He's beginning to understand that the people he hurt weren't abstract obstacles to his success, she reported. They were human beings with families and dreams and legitimate expectations of dignity. It's a hard lesson for someone who spent 25 years believing other people existed for his convenience. Whether Bradley's understanding would translate into genuine rehabilitation remained to be seen, but the possibility offered hope that even the most privileged abusers could learn empathy given sufficient time and proper guidance. The Foundation's annual conference had become a gathering point for victims' advocates and reformed business leaders who wanted to create more ethical systems. This year's keynote speaker was a former executive who had transformed his own company after witnessing the kind of worker abuse that Bradley had practiced systematically. The most powerful cleaning woe, he told the audience, happens when we remove corruption and cruelty from positions of authority, creating space for dignity and justice to flourish. His words echoed my own thoughts about what had been accomplished over the past year. The day I had posed as a cleaning lady to expose Bradley's crimes had indeed been about cleaning, but not in the way anyone had expected. We had cleaned systematic abuse from the maritime industry, cleaned corrupt practices from government contracting, and cleaned toxic attitudes from workplaces that had accepted cruelty as normal business practice. As I concluded my remarks at the conference, I reflected on the journey from that humiliating afternoon on Bradley's yacht to this moment of triumph and transformation. True power doesn't come from what you can take from others, I told the audience. It comes from what you can give back to your community. Justice delayed is not justice denied when good people refuse to give up fighting for what's right. The final element of satisfaction came from knowing that the story would continue expanding beyond my personal involvement. The Maritime Academy students were graduating with both technical skills and ethical foundations that would influence their entire careers. The worker advocacy programs were training new generations of people who would recognize and resist systematic abuse. The reformed business practices were proving that success and integrity could coexist profitably. Before leaving the stage, I addressed the audience with a question that had been developing throughout my journey from victim to advocate to successful business leader. I want to ask everyone here something important. When you witness systematic abuse of power in your workplace, your community, or your industry, what will you do about it? Will you stay silent and hope someone else takes action? Or will you find ways to hold abusers accountable for their actions? The Martinez Justice Foundation exists because one family refused to accept that losing everything to fraud was just the cost of doing business. We proved that good people working together can expose corruption, punish criminals, and build better systems for everyone. But our work isn't finished. There are more Bradley Worthingtons out there, more victims who need support, and more communities that deserve protection from systematic exploitation. So I'm asking you to join us. Support organizations fighting for worker rights, document and report abuse when you witness it. Use whatever skills and resources you have to make your corner of the world more just and compassionate. Like this video if you believe that ordinary people can create extraordinary change when we refuse to accept injustice as inevitable. Subscribe to follow our ongoing work helping families rebuild after systematic fraud. Share this story with anyone who needs to know that fighting back against powerful abusers is possible and worthwhile. And please comment below with your own experiences of standing up to workplace abuse or business fraud. Your stories inspire other victims to seek help and remind everyone that silence enables systematic cruelty to continue. Thank you for listening to this story, and thank you for caring about justice for working families. Together, we can ensure that the next Bradley Worthington faces consequences before he destroys dozens of innocent families. The Martinez Justice Foundation wishes you strength, dignity, and success in whatever challenges you're facing. Remember, good people who stand together can overcome even the most powerful bullies. True strength comes not from wealth or position, but from standing up for others who cannot stand up for themselves. When good people unite against injustice, even the most powerful bullies face consequences. The best revenge is building a better world for everyone.